On a cold February morning in 1987, a 79-year-old man named Raymond Jefferson died peacefully in his modest brick home on the east side of Detroit, Michigan. His death certificate listed congestive heart failure as the cause. His funeral was attended by close family, a few neighbors, and a young woman named Tiana Brooks, who had lived with him for just over a year. To most who attended, Raymond's passing seemed like the natural end of a long life. He had worked for decades at a General Motors plant, retired with a pension, owned his home outright, and left behind 3 grown children. The estate was divided according to Michigan law. The house went to his children. His savings account, containing roughly $47,000, was split among them. Tiana, who had no legal claim as a spouse or heir, received a small statutory survivor allowance and was given 60 days to vacate the property. By summer, she was gone. The family moved on. But 13 years later, in the year 2000, a letter arrived at the home of Raymond's eldest daughter, Erica Jefferson. It was from a bank that had recently merged with Unity First Bank, the institution where Raymond had maintained accounts for over 40 years. The letter was routine, part of an audit process. It informed the family that Raymond Jefferson had a safe deposit box that had shown no activity since 1987, and per protocol, they were being contacted as his legal heirs. Erica and her brothers, Lamar and Deshaun, were confused. They had settled their father's estate over a decade ago. They knew about his checking and savings accounts. They knew about the house. They had never heard of a safe deposit box. When they arrived at the bank and signed the necessary paperwork to access the box, they found it completely empty. But the access log told a different story. It showed that on February 10, 1987, 2 days before Raymond Jefferson's death, someone had signed in to access the box. The signature read, Tiana M. Brooks. That discovery opened a door the family had never known existed, and behind it was a truth that would reshape everything they thought they knew about their father's final year, the woman who had cared for him, and the fortune that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Tiana Michelle Brooks was born in 1963 in the Brightmoor neighborhood of Detroit, an area that by the late 1970s had become synonymous with economic decline, abandoned homes, and families struggling to stay afloat. Her mother worked sporadically as a house cleaner. Her father was absent. Tiana spent much of her childhood rotating between her mother's apartment, her grandmother's house on the west side, and occasionally the homes of aunts and uncles who took her in when things got particularly difficult. She attended Redford High School but dropped out halfway through her junior year. By 18, she was working at a Coney Island diner on Grand River Avenue, pulling double shifts to cover rent on a studio apartment she shared with a friend. Co-workers described her as polite, quiet, and focused. She rarely spoke about her personal life. She didn't party, she didn't date much. She showed up on time, worked her tables, collected her tips, and left. There was a discipline to her that seemed unusual for someone her age, a kind of watchfulness. She observed people carefully, remembered details, and knew how to adjust her demeanor depending on who she was serving. Regulars liked her. Managers trusted her. But no one really knew her. By 1985, Tiana was 22 years old and barely scraping by. Her apartment was in a building with broken locks and unreliable heat. She had no savings, no car, and no clear path forward. She had watched her mother work herself into exhaustion for pennies, and had promised herself she would never end up the same way. She began to notice patterns among the customers at the diner. She saw who tipped well, who complained, who came in alone. She paid particular attention to older men who seemed lonely, who lingered over coffee, who mentioned they lived alone. She wasn't looking for romance. She was looking for opportunity. Raymond Jefferson first came into the diner in late 1985. He was a regular at the morning breakfast rush, always ordering the same thing: 2 eggs over easy, toast, bacon, coffee. He was 78 years old, a retired supervisor from the Chrysler Jefferson Avenue plant where he had worked for 37 years. His wife, Dorothy, had died in 1982 after a long battle with diabetes. Since her death, Raymond had become increasingly isolated. His 3 children, Erica, Lamar, and Deshawn, all lived within 20 miles of him, but they had their own families, their own problems. They called occasionally. They visited on holidays. But Raymond spent most of his days alone in the house he and Dorothy had bought in 1956, a small brick bungalow on Fairview Street in the Jefferson-Chalmers neighborhood. He had his pension, his savings, and his routines. He went to the diner. He went to the hardware store. He watched television. He went to church on Sundays. He was lonely, but he didn't complain. He was from a generation that didn't talk about feelings. Tiana noticed him immediately. She noticed the way he sat alone. She noticed the gold watch on his wrist, the clean-pressed shirts, the way he paid in cash and always left a generous tip. She started paying extra attention to him. She refilled his coffee without being asked. She remembered how he liked his eggs. She asked him how his day was going and actually listened when he answered. After a few weeks, Raymond started asking for her section specifically. They began to talk. He told her about his years at the plant, about his late wife, about his children who were always too busy to visit. Tiana listened with what seemed like genuine interest. She told him she had grown up without a father, that she was working hard to build a better life, that she admired people like him who had built something stable. She never asked him for anything. She never hinted at need. She just listened, smiled, and made him feel seen. By early 1986, Raymond started coming to the diner more frequently, sometimes twice a day. He began leaving larger tips. One afternoon in March, he waited until Tiana's shift ended and offered her a ride home. She hesitated, then accepted. When he saw the neighborhood where she lived, the building with the broken front door and the graffiti on the walls, he frowned. He asked if she felt safe there. She said she managed. Over the following weeks, Raymond continued to give her rides. He started suggesting she could do better. He said he had space in his house, a spare bedroom, that he could use the company. Tiana played it carefully. She didn't jump at the offer. She expressed hesitation, said she didn't want to be a burden, that people might talk. Raymond insisted. He said he didn't care what people thought. He said he was old, that he had plenty of room, that it would help them both. In late April 1986, Tiana moved into Raymond Jefferson's home on Fairview Street. She brought 1 suitcase and a garbage bag full of clothes. She took the spare bedroom on the first floor. For the first few weeks, she kept her distance. She cooked meals, kept the house clean, and made herself useful without overstepping. Raymond's children found out within days. Erica called her father immediately, asking who this woman was and why she was living in their mother's house. Raymond became defensive. He said Tiana was a friend, that she helped him around the house, that he enjoyed the company. Erica didn't believe it. She called her brothers. The 3 of them agreed that Tiana was clearly after their father's money. They confronted him together one Sunday after church. Raymond refused to listen. He said they didn't visit him, didn't call, didn't care about him until now. He said Tiana was the only person who treated him like he mattered. The argument escalated. Raymond told them to leave. For the next several months, the relationship between Raymond and his children grew increasingly strained. They called less. They visited less. Raymond didn't seem to care. He had Tiana. What Raymond's children didn't know, and what Raymond himself only vaguely remembered, was that their father had assets that had never been formally documented in any estate plan or updated will. In 1945, when Raymond returned from serving in the Pacific during World War II, his father, a man named Thomas Jefferson, who had worked for the Ford Rouge plant for 30 years, gave him a metal lockbox. Inside that box were Series E war bonds that Thomas had purchased throughout the 1940s, gold coins he had collected during the Depression, and several rare, collectible coins from the early 1900s. Thomas told Raymond to keep the box safe, to let the bonds mature, and to pass them on to his own children when the time was right. Raymond put the box in a safe he kept in the basement of his home, behind an old wooden cabinet that had belonged to his wife's family. Over the decades, Raymond largely forgot about it. He and Dorothy lived comfortably on his pension and savings. They didn't need the bonds. The safe remained locked, hidden, untouched. In 1979, during a period of financial anxiety following the oil crisis and economic uncertainty in Detroit, Raymond moved some of the contents of the basement safe into a safe deposit box at Unity First Bank on East Jefferson Avenue. He wrote himself a note in a small leather-bound ledger, documenting what was in the box and where the key was kept. Then he put the ledger back in the basement safe and never opened it again. By the mid-1980s, those bonds had matured significantly. The gold coins had appreciated in value. The collectibles, if sold to the right buyer, were worth tens of thousands of dollars. Altogether, the contents of the safe and the safe deposit box were worth approximately $1.3 million. Raymond had never updated his will to reflect these assets. His children had no idea they existed. Tiana discovered the safe by accident in the summer of 1986. She was cleaning the basement, something Raymond had stopped doing years ago when she moved the old wooden cabinet to sweep behind it. She saw the metal door embedded in the concrete wall. She asked Raymond about it. He seemed surprised she had found it, then waved it off as old junk from his father. He said he hadn't opened it in years, that he didn't even remember the combination. Tiana pressed gently. She said she was curious, that maybe there was something valuable inside. Raymond eventually relented. He found the combination written on a scrap of paper in a drawer upstairs. Tiana opened the safe. Inside, she found the metal lockbox, the bonds, the coins, and the leather ledger. She read through the ledger carefully. She saw the note about the safe deposit box. She asked Raymond about it. He said he barely remembered putting anything in a box at the bank, that it was probably nothing important. Tiana didn't push. She closed the safe, moved the cabinet back, and said nothing more about it. But she had seen everything, she knew what was there, and she began to plan. By late 1986, Raymond's health began to decline. He had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure earlier that year, and by November he was struggling with shortness of breath, swelling in his legs, and chronic fatigue. His doctor prescribed medications and advised him to limit physical activity. Tiana took over his care completely. She managed his pills, scheduled his doctor's appointments, drove him to the clinic, and handled all of his paperwork. Raymond became increasingly dependent on her. His memory began to slip. He sometimes forgot what day it was, repeated himself in conversation, and grew confused when handling bills. Tiana suggested she take over his finances to reduce his stress. Raymond agreed. She began signing checks on his behalf, managing his accounts, and organizing his documents. When Raymond's children called, Tiana often answered the phone. She told them Raymond was resting, that he got too stressed when they visited, that the doctor had said he needed peace and quiet. The visits became less frequent. By December, Raymond rarely left the house. Tiana told neighbors she was his caretaker. Some admired her dedication. Others whispered that she was isolating him. Raymond seemed content. He told people that Tiana was the only one who truly cared about him. In early January 1987, Raymond's condition worsened. He was hospitalized briefly for fluid buildup in his lungs, then sent home with instructions for hospice care. Tiana arranged everything. She set up a hospital bed in the living room, coordinated with visiting nurses, and rarely left his side. On February 8, 1987, Raymond's breathing became labored. Tiana called his children and told them they should come say goodbye. Erica, Lamar, and Deshawn arrived that evening. They sat with their father, held his hand, and told him they loved him. Raymond was barely conscious. He died 2 days later on February 10, 1987, at approximately 6:20 in the morning. Tiana called 911. The paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead. The death certificate listed congestive heart failure as the cause. There was no autopsy. There was no investigation. Raymond Jefferson had been 79 years old, in failing health, under medical care. His death was expected. Tiana made the funeral arrangements. She contacted Raymond's children and provided them with the details. The funeral was held at a small chapel on the east side. Roughly 30 people attended. Tiana sat in the front row. Raymond's children sat beside her, uncomfortable but silent. After the service, Tiana returned to the house on Fairview Street. Raymond's children told her they would begin the process of settling the estate and that she would need to vacate the property within 60 days, as required by Michigan law. Tiana said she understood. She asked if she could have 2 nights alone in the house to say goodbye, to pack her things, and to process her grief in private. The request seemed reasonable. Raymond's children agreed. They were exhausted, grieving, and eager to avoid conflict. They left Tiana alone in the house. What happened during those 2 nights would not be fully understood until 13 years later. On the evening of February 10th, after the family had left, Tiana went down to the basement. She moved the cabinet, opened the safe, and removed everything inside. The metal lockbox, the bonds, the gold coins, the collectibles, and the leather ledger. She carried everything upstairs and placed it in a large duffel bag she had purchased weeks earlier. The following morning, February 11th, Tiana drove to Unity First Bank on East Jefferson Avenue. She brought the key to Raymond's safe deposit box, which she had found in the ledger. She also brought Raymond's Michigan driver's license, a utility bill showing his address, and a piece of mail addressed to both Raymond and herself at the Fairview Street house. She approached the desk and explained that she needed to access Raymond Jefferson's safe deposit box. The bank employee, a woman in her mid-40s, asked for identification. Tiana showed her Raymond's license and the mail. She explained that Raymond had recently died, that she had been his caretaker, and that she needed to secure his personal documents. The employee expressed condolences. She asked if Tiana was listed as an authorized user on the box. Tiana said she believed she was, that Raymond had added her months ago. The employee checked the records. Tiana's name was not listed, but the policies at Unity First Bank in 1987 were not as stringent as they would later become. The employee saw that Tiana had a key, that she had Raymond's identification, and that she lived at his address. She made a judgment call. She allowed Tiana to access the box. Tiana signed the access log with her full name, Tiana M. Brooks. She was led to the vault, where she used the key to open box number 447. Inside, she found exactly what the ledger had described. Additional Series E bonds, more gold coins, and several rare collectible items that had belonged to Raymond's father. She removed everything, placed it in a small leather briefcase she had brought with her, and left the box empty. She thanked the employee and walked out of the bank. The entire process took less than 20 minutes. The next day, Tiana attended Raymond's funeral. She sat quietly, expressed her condolences to the family, and returned to the house one final time. Over the following weeks, she packed her belongings, cleaned the house, and prepared to leave. Raymond's estate went through probate. His children inherited the house and the contents of his savings account, which totaled $47,000. The attorney handling the estate reviewed Raymond's will, which had been written in 1978 and never updated. There was no mention of a basement safe. There was no mention of bonds or gold coins. There was no mention of a safe deposit box. Because these assets had never been formally documented, they were not included in the probate process. Raymond's children believed their father had died with modest assets, a paid-off house, a pension, and some savings. They had no idea that $1.3 million in hidden wealth had existed, and they had no idea that Tiana Brooks had taken it all. By May 1987, Tiana had left Detroit. She moved to Houston, Texas, a city where she had no connections, no history, and no one who knew her name. She rented a small apartment in the Montrose neighborhood and took a job at a clothing boutique on Westheimer Road. She kept a low profile. She paid her bills in cash, avoided drawing attention, and rarely spoke about her past. The bonds and gold coins remained hidden in a storage unit she rented under a false name. She did not touch them, not yet. She knew that cashing the bonds immediately would raise red flags. Series E bonds issued in the 1940s were still redeemable, but presenting them at a bank in large quantities would require identification, documentation, and potentially trigger IRS reporting. Tiana was patient. She waited. In 1989, Tiana legally changed her last name to Brooks Johnson, claiming she had married and later divorced. The name change gave her an additional layer of separation from her past. In 1990, she began cashing small portions of the bonds. She would go to different banks, presenting 1 or 2 bonds at a time, claiming they had been gifts from a relative. The amounts were small enough not to raise suspicion. She deposited the money into different accounts at different institutions, spreading the trail. Over the course of 3 years, she converted roughly $200,000 in bonds into cash. In 1994, she used that money to purchase a modest 2-bedroom house in the Independence Heights neighborhood of Houston. She paid in cash. The purchase raised no alarms. Independent cash sales were not uncommon in Houston's real estate market, particularly in working-class neighborhoods. Tiana told neighbors she had saved money from years of working in retail. No one questioned it. By 1995, Tiana had established herself as a small business owner. She opened a custom jewelry shop called Brooks Combs in a strip mall on North Shepherd Drive. The shop specialized in vintage and estate jewelry, which allowed her to gradually sell off the gold coins and collectibles she had taken from Raymond's safe. She marketed herself as a dealer in rare and antique pieces. Customers were told that she acquired inventory from estate sales, auctions, and private sellers. In reality, she was liquidating Raymond Jefferson's hidden fortune piece by piece. She sold the items slowly, carefully, always to different buyers, always for cash or certified checks. By 1998, she'd converted the remainder of the bonds and sold off most of the coins. She used the money to purchase a second property, a small rental house in the near North Side area. She now owned 2 properties outright, ran a successful business, and lived comfortably. To everyone who knew her in Houston, Tiana Brooks Johnson was a hardworking entrepreneur who had built her success from the ground up. No one suspected that her wealth had come from an elderly man in Detroit who had died over a decade ago. Tiana's life in Houston was stable, but it was not without stress. She lived in constant low-level fear of being discovered. She avoided traveling to Michigan. She avoided using her original name. She kept her social circle small and never spoke in detail about her past. She didn't date seriously. She didn't form close friendships. She maintained a kind of emotional distance from everyone around her. a self-imposed isolation born from the need to protect the secret she carried. There were moments when the paranoia became overwhelming. In 1992, she thought she saw someone from Detroit at a grocery store and left her cart in the aisle, walking out immediately. In 1996, she received a phone call from someone claiming to be conducting a survey about former Detroit residents, and hung up without answering any questions. In 1999, a customer at her jewelry shop mentioned they were from Michigan, and Tiana became so uncomfortable that she closed the shop early that day, claiming she was ill. She knew that what she had done existed in a legal gray area. She had not forged Raymond's signature. She had not stolen from his documented estate. She had simply taken assets that no one knew existed, assets that were not listed in his will, and she had done so in a way that was difficult to prosecute. But she also knew that if the truth ever came out, her life would be destroyed. In early 2000, Unity First Bank underwent a merger with a larger regional financial institution. As part of the merger, the new bank conducted a comprehensive audit of all inactive accounts and unclaimed safe deposit boxes. During that process, an auditor flagged box number 447, which had been registered to Raymond Jefferson. The box had shown no activity since 1987, and Raymond Jefferson had been deceased for over 13 years. Per the bank's updated policies, they were required to attempt contact with the legal heirs. The bank's legal department researched Raymond Jefferson's estate records and identified his 3 children as his heirs. On March 15, 2000, a letter was sent to Erica Jefferson's address in Detroit, informing her of the existence of the safe deposit box and requesting that she contact the bank to arrange access. Erica received the letter on March 18th. She was confused. She had never heard her father mention a safe deposit box. She called her brothers, Lamar and Deshawn, and asked if they knew anything about it. Neither of them did. The 3 of them agreed to meet at the bank the following week. On March 22, 2000, Erica, Lamar, and Deshawn Jefferson arrived at the branch that had absorbed Unity First Bank. They met with a bank representative and provided documentation proving they were Raymond Jefferson's legal heirs. They signed the necessary paperwork and were escorted to the vault. Box 447 was opened. It was completely empty. The bank representative seemed surprised. She suggested that perhaps their father had emptied the box before his death. Erica asked if there were any records of who had accessed the box. The representative checked the logs. The last recorded access was on February 11, 1987. The signature on the access log read, Tiana M. Brooks. Erica felt her stomach drop. She asked the representative to print a copy of the log. The representative complied. Erica stared at the signature. February 11, 1987. That was the day after their father's funeral. That was one of the 2 nights Tiana had asked to be alone in the house. Lamar and Deshawn leaned over to look at the paper. All 3 of them understood immediately. Tiana had taken something from that box. Something valuable. Something their father had kept hidden. Over the following days, Erica, Lamar, and Deshawn began to investigate. They returned to their father's house, which had been sold years ago, and tried to piece together what might have been in the safe deposit box. They searched through old documents, called relatives, and tried to remember conversations their father had mentioned. Deshawn remembered that their grandfather, Thomas Jefferson, had worked at the Ford plant and had been known to save money obsessively during the Depression. He remembered their father mentioning vaguely that his father had left him some old coins and bonds. Erica called the bank again and asked if there were any other records related to their father's accounts. The bank conducted a more thorough search and discovered something else. In addition to Box 447, there had been a second safe deposit box registered under Raymond Jefferson's name, Box 512, which had been opened in 1979 and closed in 1994. The closure had been handled by mail. The requester had provided Raymond Jefferson's death certificate and claimed to be settling his estate. The contents of Box 512 had been released to an individual named Tiana Brooks Johnson, who had provided a notarized letter claiming she was handling Raymond's final affairs. The bank had no record of what had been inside the box. Erica felt physically ill. Tiana had not only accessed the box in 1987, she had returned years later and officially closed a second box, claiming she was acting on behalf of the estate. The family hired a private investigator. Within 2 weeks, the investigator located Tiana Brooks Johnson in Houston, Texas. She owned 2 properties, ran a jewelry business, and appeared to be living comfortably. The investigator provided the family with photographs, property records, and business filings. Everything pointed to a woman who had come into significant money sometime in the late 1980s or early 1990s. The family consulted with an attorney. The attorney reviewed the timeline, the bank records, and the circumstances of Raymond's death. He delivered difficult news. Because the assets Tiana had taken had never been formally documented in Raymond's estate, and because she had accessed the safe deposit boxes either before his death or through a process that appeared, on paper, to be legitimate, building a criminal case would be extremely difficult. Additionally, the statute of limitations for most financial crimes in Michigan at that time was between 5 and 7 years. It had been 13 years since Raymond's death. Even if prosecutors wanted to pursue charges, they were likely time-barred. The attorney said the family could attempt a civil lawsuit, but proving damages would be difficult. They would need to demonstrate exactly what had been in the safe, how much it was worth, and that Tiana had taken it unlawfully. Without Raymond alive to testify and without any documentation of the assets, the case would be circumstantial at best. Erica, Lamar, and Deshawn were devastated. They realized that Tiana had not only stolen from their father, she had done so in a way that was nearly impossible to prosecute. She had been careful. She had waited. She had spread out the liquidation of the assets over years. She had changed her name, moved to another state, and built a plausible cover story. The family contacted the Detroit Police Department and filed a report. A detective was assigned to the case. He reviewed the evidence, contacted the Houston Police Department, and attempted to interview Tiana. Tiana refused to speak without an attorney present. Her attorney, a criminal defense lawyer based in Houston, issued a brief statement. The statement said that Tiana had cared for Raymond Jefferson during the final year of his life, that she had been given access to certain personal effects as compensation for her service, and that any assets she possessed had been obtained lawfully. The statement denied any wrongdoing and noted that the statute of limitations had long since expired. The detective in Detroit closed the case due to insufficient evidence and jurisdictional limitations. The Jefferson family made one final attempt. In late 2000, they contacted a reporter at the Detroit Free Press and provided the full story. The reporter investigated, interviewed the family, reviewed the bank records, and contacted Tiana's attorney. The attorney declined to allow Tiana to be interviewed. In January 2001, the Detroit Free Press published a feature story titled "The Woman Who Waited." The article detailed Tiana's relationship with Raymond Jefferson, the discovery of the empty safe deposit boxes, and the family's belief that she had stolen over $1 million in hidden assets. The article noted that no charges had been filed and that Tiana denied any wrongdoing. The story was picked up by a few local news outlets but did not gain national attention. In Houston, a few customers at Tiana's jewelry shop asked her about the article. She told them it was a misunderstanding, that Raymond's family had never accepted her relationship with him, and that they were trying to blame her for their own financial disappointments. Most people believed her. Her business continued. Her properties retained their value. Her life went on. By 2005, the Jefferson family had exhausted every legal avenue. They had no way to recover what had been taken. Erica Jefferson gave one final interview to a local Detroit television station. She said that her father had been a good man, that he had worked his entire life, and that he had intended to leave his children a legacy. Instead, she said, a woman who had known him for barely a year had manipulated him, isolated him from his family, and stolen everything he had hidden away for them. She said the legal system had failed them. She said she hoped that one day Tiana Brooks Johnson would face consequences for what she had done. That interview aired on a Saturday evening in Detroit and was never seen outside of Michigan. Tiana Brooks Johnson continued to live in Houston for another decade. She eventually sold her jewelry business in 2012 and retired. She sold one of her properties and kept the other as her primary residence. She lived quietly, maintained a small social circle, and avoided attention. She never returned to Detroit. She never spoke publicly about Raymond Jefferson. In 2015, a journalist working on a podcast about financial crimes in the 1980s contacted her for an interview. She declined. The podcast episode aired without her participation, but it brought renewed attention to the case. Online forums and true crime communities began discussing the story. Some people condemned Tiana as a predator who had exploited a vulnerable elderly man. Others argued that she had been smart, that she had seen an opportunity and taken it, and that if Raymond had truly cared about his children, he would have documented his assets properly. The debate went nowhere. The facts remained unchanged. Raymond Jefferson died in 1987. Tiana Brooks took assets worth approximately $1.3 million. She was never charged with a crime. The Jefferson family never recovered a cent. The case of Tiana Brooks and Raymond Jefferson raises uncomfortable questions about elder exploitation, financial crimes, and the limitations of the legal system. Raymond Jefferson was a man who had worked his entire life, who had saved diligently, and who had been entrusted with a legacy from his own father. He kept that legacy hidden, intending to pass it on to his children when the time was right. But he never formalized that intention. He never updated his will. He never told his children where the assets were or how much they were worth. That failure created a vulnerability, and Tiana Brooks exploited it with precision. She identified a lonely, elderly man. She presented herself as a solution to his loneliness. She gained his trust, moved into his home, and positioned herself to access everything he owned. When his health declined, she took control of his finances and his care. When he died, she acted quickly, methodically, and without hesitation. She knew that the assets were undocumented. She knew that the family didn't know they existed. She knew that if she moved carefully and waited long enough, she would be untouchable. And she was right. The legal system failed the Jefferson family not because of corruption or negligence, but because the system itself was not designed to address this particular kind of crime. Tiana had not broken into the house. She had not forged documents. She had not committed fraud in the traditional sense. She had simply taken assets that no one knew existed, at a time when the person who owned them was either dying or already dead, and she had done so in a way that left almost no prosecutable trail. The bonds were bearer instruments, meaning they could be redeemed by anyone who possessed them. The gold coins were untraceable. The safe deposit box access, while questionable, had been allowed by the bank. By the time the family discovered what had happened, the statute of limitations had expired. Tiana had understood the system well enough to navigate around it. The emotional toll on the Jefferson family was immense. Erica Jefferson later said in an interview that the loss of the money was painful, but the loss of trust was worse. She said that her father had been isolated, manipulated, and ultimately betrayed by someone he had believed cared about him. She said that the family had been denied the opportunity to say goodbye properly because Tiana had controlled access to him in his final days. She said that the knowledge of what Tiana had done and the inability to hold her accountable had created a wound that never fully healed. Lamar Jefferson said that he regretted not pushing harder to maintain contact with his father during that final year, even when Tiana made it difficult. He said that he and his siblings had assumed their father would be fine, that he would live longer, that there would be time to repair the relationship. Instead, their father had died, and everything they should have inherited had been stolen. Deshaun Jefferson said that the hardest part was knowing that Tiana was living comfortably in Texas, enjoying a life built on money that should have gone to Raymond's grandchildren. He said that he thought about it often, that he wondered if she ever felt guilt, and that he doubted she did. For Tiana Brooks Johnson, the consequences were minimal. She was never arrested. She was never sued successfully. She was never forced to return what she had taken. She lived a comfortable, quiet life built on the foundation of $1.3 million that had belonged to a man who trusted her. In public records, she is listed as a former small business owner and property owner in Houston. In the memories of the Jefferson family, she is the woman who destroyed their father's legacy. The case remains, to this day, a reminder of how easily the vulnerable can be exploited, how difficult it is to prove financial crimes when the assets involved are hidden, and how the passage of time can protect those who are willing to wait. Tiana Brooks understood that patience was her greatest weapon, as she understood that if she did not rush, did not draw attention, and did not deviate from her plan, she would succeed. And she did. Raymond Jefferson died believing that someone cared about him. His children lived for 13 years, not knowing that their inheritance had been stolen. And Tiana Brooks built a life on the ruins of both.